So, we answered a lot of different questions where you applied what you had researched, either on explorers, on the fur trade, on the relationship between First Nations and the Europeans when they first came over, or on treaties. One of the popular questions was, how might people cooperate with each other, or why is it important to cooperate with others? And those two kind of went together. Does somebody hear of something that they would like to start us off with? Okay, I'm going to start over here with Claire and Jenna. So what did you come up with?
Well, do you want to read this?
Sure.
I did why is it important to cooperate with others? And I chose to talk about a little bit about the fur trade.
Okay.
So I said that if they didn't cooperate, there would really not be any fur trade, and the First Nations and Europeans would probably not get the equipment they needed to survive.
Okay. And why did you say there probably wouldn't have been the fur trade without them cooperating?
Well, if they were still fighting, then they couldn't really trade items.
Okay.
If they were against each other.
Okay. And did you have anything else to explain too?
Also that if they didn't cooperate, like I said, there would be no fur trade, and if they're still against each other and they give their items away,
Yeah.
then they'd make the other side stronger.
Right. So what did the fur trade then allow that kind of speaks to the power of cooperation?
That probably made friendships
Okay.
between the two.
And even if it didn't necessarily, because were the First Nations and Europeans, were they ever really friendly with each other? Not quite, but what did it at least allow for, even if it wasn't a friendship?
Communication between the two.
Absolutely. And Claire, did you want to share yours?
I did how might people cooperate with each other,
Yes.
and I did First Nations.
Okay.
In the fur trade, the First Nations and Europeans had to cooperate to survive because they needed each other's resources.
Yes.
Like, they needed, the First Nations needed guns
Yeah.
so they could hunt faster, and that would help them to trade the fur.
Okay.
And the Europeans needed medical advice, herbs,
Yes.
and they mostly wanted land now,
Okay.
which they thought traded a lot.
Other things?
And because the Europeans, they needed each other and needed kind of like agreement
Yes.
or a treaty.
Yeah.
Because the Europeans, personally, I think the Europeans would have starved to death because they only had so much food on their boat. It
Okay.
would be dangerous to try to get food.
Okay.
And the First Nations were fine without them, so I think the Europeans needed them more than the First Nations did.
Okay.
The Europeans traded weapons such as guns for hunting. The First Nations traded beads, meat, fur, medical advice, and herbs. The Europeans and First Nations needed each other to survive because of their resources.
Okay. Does somebody else have something to add to that discussion about cooperation? Katerina.
The question I did is why did they cooperate with each other?
Okay.
If the Europeans didn't cooperate with the First Nations, they would have died.
Okay.
Because they hardly had like food or stuff like that, so they had to trade.
Okay.
Plus, First Nations didn't have like stuff that the Europeans had,
Okay.
and the Europeans didn't have stuff that the First Nations
Can you give me some examples of some of the stuff?
First Nations had fur,
Yes.
and the Europeans had like plastic and like metal and stuff,
Yeah.
materials. So they traded because they were both handy, those things.
Okay, so they were able to go back and forth. Did somebody else have something that they would like to share out loud, either that they've written down or not, about that particular topic? Oh, about this topic? You have the cooperation one. Okay, go for it, Ashkan.
I did how much people cooperate with each other.
Yeah?
I did Samuel the Champlain.
Yeah.
Samuel the Champlain cooperated with his crew by listening to them, they all had to work together to be able to sail a boat together and map the Great Lakes. Samuel de Champlain argued with the First nations because they didn't agree with each other
Yeah.
on the fur trade. Samuel de Champlain had to fight the Iroquois because he formed an alliance with the Huron First Nation to protect French settlement
Yes.
where Europeans lived.
Yeah.
Samuel didn't cooperate with the Iroquois, but he did cooperate with the Huron First Nation.
And how did the cooperation help him? How did it help? Or with him not cooperating, what were the problems?
If they didn't cooperate,
Yeah.
he wouldn't be a great sailor, and they wouldn't be sailing their boat.
And what did the sailing lead to?
Battles.
Well, eventually.
Great Lakes.
Yeah, but when he sailed, what was the whole purpose of his sailing? What happened when he eventually sailed? Or can someone else help me with that? What happened, Tyler?
Found Quebec and Montreal.
Right. So if they hadn't worked together to sail the boat, then what would have happened?
Everything would have gone wrong and they would have been finding Quebec.
That's right. And Quebec is like a really important part of Canada, right? So that's kind of significant if you think about it. Okay. Does somebody else have something on a different topic to share? Okay, Sky and Mariah.
Who goes first?
Doesn't matter. Who would you like?
Okay. Our question was, how might the same event have a different impact on different people?
Okay.
And I wrote, the First Nations would do all the work. They would do the cooking, the cleaning, the hunting all the time because they didn't have a lot of money, so they didn't have a lot of wealth.
Okay.
So they would do more of it. And the Europeans wouldn't really do anything because they had more weapons, more gold, more valuables, and they had more money, so they didn't really need to do anything.
Okay.
And they had better food, better shelter. So the First Nations had teepees,
Okay.
and the Europeans had houses.
Okay.
And because some of the Europeans were explorers, when they explored, they took over the land.
Yes.
How Samuel de Champlain,
Yeah.
how he took over the land, he came out and he started shooting
Yes.
the First Nations.
Yeah.
And that made them less wealthy, and that made the Europeans more wealthy. So when they went to war, the Europeans had guns, and the First Nations had arrows that was made out of wood. So the Europeans would most likely win because guns are more deadly than arrows and stuff. And the Europeans traded weapons and some food, and the First Nations traded animals, animal food, and animal fur. And this is how the same event had a different impact on it.
Okay, so let's go to your fur trade piece at the end there, okay? So the event was the fur trade. How was the impact different then for them? What was different about that?
That the First Nations would hunt and try their best of getting the animals, killing them, and cooking it.
Yeah.
And then they trade it, and then the Europeans, they wouldn't do anything for it. They would just trade at the fur trade. They wouldn't do anything like the hunting.
But didn't they get something? What did they get? The Europeans got what?
The Europeans got the animals.
But what did the First Nations get? Because that's kind of the nature of trading if you think about it. Mariah?
I think they got some weapons and maybe a little bit of their food.
Does somebody else know what they got? It wasn't as much the food piece because they could hunt. First Nations could hunt. Ella? Yeah, and well, what else? What did the First Nations get in comparison? You've got it, yes. They did. And so what was the value of them getting guns? Why would that matter? Was. And if they could go hunting, how did that benefit them?
Can I say something?
Yes?
They got, like, if they went hunting, they would get more, and so it would just keep going over and over again in the same way. And also, I don't think they really cared that they were doing more work because they got the same in return. So it didn't really matter.
Right, so and they both did actually get something in return, didn't they? But not exactly the same thing. Somebody else have something to share? Mark. You did the cooperation one, right? Or did you have something to share on this topic?
Cooperation.
Okay, and what did you find out?
I just know that the Europeans and the First Nations were cooperated poorly and good. Because
Okay.
with the fur trade, if they didn't cooperate good, there wouldn't
Yes.
have been the fur trade.
Yeah?
And they cooperated poorly because they had wars and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. So, and the war didn't lead to much good cooperation, did it? No. Is there anyone else who did a different topic that would like a chance to share? I know you've all written it down and I don't expect the sharing, but this is your chance to just add to something you didn't write. Anybody else have something else to share? Okay. So